32M. Honestly don't know why I'm even posting this. I guess it's for my own sanity because I've been living in a nightmare for the past couple of weeks. My wife, Sarah, 29F, has always been a bit, let's just say, difficult. I knew she had a temper when we first got together, but I thought it was just passion. She could be charming and sweet one minute, then flip to cold and distant without warning. But I loved her. Hell, I still love her. At least, I think I do. So, here's how it started. Sarah doesn't drive. Never has. She's always used Uber or taxis to get around. I never thought much of it. It's not like we have kids, and I figured she liked the convenience. I work long hours, so it made sense she'd take rides here and there. But a few months ago, she started using the same driver. His name's Jake, 35M, some local guy she felt comfortable with. At first, I didn't care. It made sense to stick with one person you trusted, right? She even said it was safer, since he already knew where we lived. I was too busy with work to question it. But then, she started going on more and more trips. I'm just running errands, she'd say. It's easier than you having to drive me everywhere. She made me feel guilty, like I wasn't doing enough for her. Looking back, that's probably when the lies started. I was too blind to see it. Things really started to get weird a few weeks after she started riding with Jake more frequently. Sarah's errands got longer, sometimes taking up the entire day. She'd come home late, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. And when I asked her about it, she always had some bullshit excuse ready. Oh, I went shopping with some friends. Had to pick something up from across town. You know how traffic can be. She'd roll her eyes, acting like I was being ridiculous for even asking. And yeah, I let it slide because I didn't want to be the controlling husband. But deep down, something felt off. I ignored it though. Told myself I was just overthinking. Hell, she even convinced me I was. You're paranoid, she'd say. If you trusted me, you wouldn't be asking so many questions. I started noticing Jake was outside the house more often. I'd be getting ready for work, and there he was, parked across the street, waiting for Sarah. She claimed it was just because he lived nearby. It's just a coincidence, babe. Relax. But the frequency of his visits kept increasing. Some nights, she'd even stay out late, saying she was with friends. One night, I asked her point-blank why she was spending so much time with this one driver. She snapped at me, called me insecure and controlling, then stormed off. It was one of those arguments where you just sit there, questioning everything, but at the same time, feeling like you might be crazy for even bringing it up. Looking back, it was so obvious. But I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe my wife could actually be doing something behind my back. So, I let her lies stack up, one on top of the other. Things started unraveling faster than I could keep up. A couple of weeks after that argument, Sarah began acting even more strange. She'd be glued to her phone all the time, laughing at texts, but when I asked what was so funny, she'd say, "Oh, nothing important." She was getting more secretive, and I could feel her pulling away from me. One night, she came home late again, looking flustered. I was sitting on the couch, waiting for her. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to sound casual but feeling the weight of suspicion. She waved me off, barely making eye contact. "I told you, I went out with Jenny. We had drinks. Stop being so damn needy." That's when she slipped. Her phone buzzed, and she instinctively grabbed it, but not before I saw the message flash across the screen. "Had a great time tonight, Sarah. Can't wait to see you again tomorrow. Jake." I felt my stomach drop. There was no way to misinterpret that. I couldn't let it go this time. "Jake," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You were with Jake tonight?" She froze, and for a second, I saw real panic in her eyes. But then, just like that, she switched gears. "Oh my God, Are you serious? He just gave me a ride home. I told you I was with Jenny. Jake's just a friend. Why are you so obsessed with this guy? It's creepy. I didn't buy it. Not anymore. But I wasn't ready for the full confrontation. Not yet. So, I let it go, pretending to believe her bullshit story. She stormed off to bed, muttering about how she couldn't deal with my jealousy. But after that, I started paying closer attention. I didn't trust her anymore, and I wasn't going to ignore the red flags again. Something was going on, and I was going to find out exactly what it was. After that slip-up, I knew I couldn't just sit around and let her keep lying to my face. I needed proof. I wasn't going to confront her without knowing for sure. So, I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I started keeping tabs on her. The next day, Sarah told me she was going out to meet a friend. No mention of Jake, no specific time she'd be back. Classic vague Sarah. I decided to follow her. She left the house around noon, and like clockwork, Jake's car was parked down the street. I watched from a distance as she hopped into the front seat, laughing at something he said. They didn't drive off immediately, though. They sat there for a few minutes, talking, and I could tell from her body language that this wasn't just her driver. She leaned in close to him, twirling her hair, giggling like a schoolgirl. I felt sick. I tailed them for a while, careful to keep my distance. They weren't heading to any friends' houses or malls like she usually claimed. They ended up at this little cafe on the outskirts of town. I parked across the street and watched as they sat at a table, way too close for comfort, holding hands under the table. My stomach churned as I saw her looking at him with a smile I hadn't seen in years. The worst part? After their cozy little coffee date, they didn't head back home. Instead, they drove to some hotel. A fucking hotel. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but there it was, right in front of me. I sat in my car, numb, as I watched her disappear inside with him. It was all so surreal, like something out of a bad dream. This wasn't just some casual flirtation. My wife was having a full-blown affair with this guy, and she didn't even care to hide it anymore. I could have stormed into the hotel and confronted her right then and there, but something held me back. I needed to plan. I couldn't just act on impulse. So, I stayed in the car, seething, trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the scene at the hotel over and over in my head, imagining all the ways I could confront her. I wanted to burst through the door and catch her in the act, but I also knew that Sarah was the type of person who'd turn the whole thing around on me. She'd call me paranoid, tell me I was overreacting, and somehow twist it so I was the bad guy. The next morning, Sarah acted completely normal. She kissed me goodbye, told me she was meeting Jenny again later, and didn't even flinch. I wanted to scream at her, demand answers, but I kept it cool. I had to play this right. I needed a plan. I started looking into divorce lawyers that day, just in case. I wasn't sure how far this would go, but I knew I needed to be prepared. I also started gathering proof, texts, receipts, and whatever little things I could find. I'd had enough of her lies. That afternoon, when she left again, I didn't follow her this time. I already knew where she was going. Instead, I decided to test something. I called Jenny, Sarah's friend. Jenny and I weren't super close, but we'd hung out a few times in the past. I tried to sound casual. "Hey, Jenny, just checking in. Sarah said she was hanging out with you again today. You guys getting drinks or something?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. What? I haven't seen Sarah in weeks. What are you talking about? My heart sank. I had all the confirmation I needed. Later that night, when she came back, I didn't mention Jenny's call. I watched her closely, waiting for another lie, but she was slick, acting like everything was perfectly fine. She told me she was tired and going to bed early, but I could see the smirk on her face, like she thought she had me wrapped around her finger. That's when I knew. I couldn't just wait around anymore. The next time she went out with Jake, I was going to catch her red-handed. After Jenny confirmed what I already suspected, my patience was wearing thin. I couldn't just sit back and let this continue. I needed to catch her in the act. No more speculation, no more doubts, just cold, hard evidence. Sarah had no idea I was onto her, and I planned to use that to my advantage. I decided that the next time she claimed she was going out, I'd follow her more closely and confront her. But this time, I wasn't going to hide. I was going to catch her with Jake and let her lies unravel right in front of her. Sure enough, the opportunity came sooner than expected. 2 days later, Sarah told me she had another girls' night with Jenny. The same Jenny who hadn't seen her in weeks. I played along, acting like I believed every word. "Have fun, babe," I said, forcing a smile, even though every fiber of my being was screaming at me. As soon as she left, I grabbed my car keys and followed her again, keeping a safe distance. I knew exactly where she was headed. Jake's car was parked down the street, waiting for her, like it always was. I watched from a distance as she climbed into the passenger seat, her hand resting on his thigh as they drove off. But this time, they didn't head to the cafe or the hotel. No, they were bolder now. They drove to some quiet, secluded area by the river. One of those spots where no one would usually go. My blood was boiling, but I kept calm. I wasn't going to blow up just yet. I parked my car far enough away so they wouldn't notice me but close enough to see what was happening. And then, right in front of me, they started getting handsy. Sarah was all over him, and Jake, that smug bastard, was eating it up. They clearly thought they were safe. She was laughing, touching him, and before long, things escalated. It wasn't long before they were practically tearing each other's clothes off right there in the back of his car. That was it. I got out of my car and marched right up to them. They were so wrapped up in each other, they didn't even notice me at first. I banged on the window, and they both froze, panic spreading across their faces. Sarah scrambled to cover herself, but it was too late. I had seen everything. "Having fun?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. She opened the door, half-dressed, her face a mix of shock and anger. "What the hell are you doing here?" I crossed my arms, staring her down. "I could ask you the same thing." Jake looked like he was about to piss himself. Sarah, though, quickly shifted into her usual hysterical self. "This isn't what it looks like," she yelled, even though it was exactly what it looked like. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me this time. "Save it. I'm done listening to your lies." The look on her face changed. She wasn't used to me standing up to her like this, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. But instead of apologizing or trying to explain, she went full bitch mode. "You've been spying on me? How fucking dare you? This is your fault. You pushed me to this. You never pay attention to me anymore, so what was I supposed to do?" I couldn't believe it. She was actually blaming me for catching her having sex in another man's car. But that was Sarah, always twisting the truth, always making herself the victim. "Well, not this time. You can spin it however you want," I said, my voice steady. "But we're done. I'm filing for divorce." Her face went pale, and for a moment, she looked like she might actually cry. But then, as quickly as the vulnerability appeared, it vanished. She sneered at me. "Fine. You think I care? Go ahead. You were never man enough for me anyway." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with Jake, half naked and exposed, both literally and figuratively. I wasn't going to let her play her games anymore. This was the beginning of the end. After catching Sarah in the act, I left her there, standing with Jake, too stunned to follow me or scream her usual nonsense. I got in my car, heart racing, and drove home in silence. The whole situation felt surreal, like I'd stepped into someone else's life. But reality hit as soon as I walked through our front door. This was it. My marriage was over. That night, Sarah didn't come home. I didn't expect her to. I didn't even care where she was or if she was still with Jake. I was too angry to think about anything but the divorce. I knew she'd try to manipulate her way out of it, but this time, I had the upper hand. I had proof, and I was ready to use it. The next morning, I texted her. I didn't want to talk to her face to face anymore. I want you out of the house by the end of the week. I'll be filing for divorce. It took her about 5 minutes to respond, and when she did, it was classic Sarah. Sarah, you're seriously overreacting. We need to talk. This doesn't have to end like this. I was going to tell you everything, but you freaked out. Overreacting. The word made me laugh bitterly. How typical of her to make me feel like the crazy one, as if catching her screwing her lover in a car was just some minor misunderstanding. I didn't even bother replying. But of course, Sarah wasn't going to let it go that easily. Later that afternoon, she showed up at the house, not to apologize or even discuss the divorce, but to rant. The moment she walked in, her face was full of indignation, and I could feel the storm brewing before she even said a word. I can't believe you did this, she spat. You humiliated me. You're making a huge deal out of nothing. I stared at her in disbelief. Nothing? You call cheating on me in the back of a car nothing? She threw her hands in the air dramatically. It wasn't like that. You don't get it. You've been ignoring me for months. What was I supposed to do, huh? Sit around waiting for you to come home and pretend like I don't exist? I needed attention, and you weren't giving it to me. Her voice had that hysterical edge again, like she was trying to justify everything as if it all made sense in her twisted mind. I wasn't having any of it. So, your solution was to screw around with a taxi driver? I shot back, feeling my blood boil again. And then you try to spin it like it's my fault? You're unbelievable. Her face turned red, and for a moment, she looked genuinely shocked that I was standing up to her. I'd spent so long bending to her temper tantrums that she didn't know how to handle it when I didn't cave. I needed more, okay? You didn't give a shit about me anymore, she yelled. Jake made me feel special. He made me feel like I mattered. I shook my head, disgusted. Well, congratulations. Now you and Jake can ride off into the sunset together because I'm done. You can stay with him for all I care. I want you out. The look on her face changed. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something else. Desperation. For a second, I thought she might actually apologize, but instead, she took a deep breath and lowered her voice. You don't really want to do this, she said, a smirk creeping back on her face. You think you can just walk away from me like that? You're going to regret this. That smug, manipulative look, the same one she'd used so many times before, made my stomach turn. But I didn't flinch this time. Get out, Sarah, I said quietly, my patience gone. We're done. She stood there for a moment, seething, before finally grabbing her things and storming out. But before she left, she turned back to me with one last jab. You'll regret this, she hissed. Just wait. I shut the door behind her, heart pounding. I knew this wasn't over. But I wasn't going to let her control me anymore. The fallout had just begun, and I had a feeling things were going to get even messier. After Sarah stormed out, I finally had a moment to breathe. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest, but I knew better than to believe she'd just disappear from my life without stirring up more chaos. That wasn't her style. Sarah was the type to make sure that if she went down, she'd take everyone with her. Sure enough, she didn't waste time. The very next day, I started getting texts from mutual friends and even some people I barely knew. Sarah had gone on a full-blown smear campaign. She told everyone that I was the one who had been neglectful, cold, and emotionally abusive. In her version of the story, she had no choice but to find affection elsewhere because I had supposedly pushed her away for months. One of my close friends, Mike, called me up, confused as hell. "Dude, Sarah's saying you've been cheating on her for years. What's going on?" I was speechless for a second. Cheating? She was actually trying to flip the script that hard? "She's lying," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "She's the one cheating on me. I caught her with some guy. A fucking taxi driver." Mike let out a low whistle. "Jesus, man. She's saying you've been screwing around, not her." It was classic Sarah: deflect, twist, and make herself the victim. I had seen this before in smaller ways throughout our relationship, but this was on another level. The worst part? Some people believed her. She was always good at playing the damsel in distress when it suited her. Her ability to manipulate emotions was borderline psychotic. I spent the rest of the day fielding calls and texts, trying to set the record straight. But it didn't matter. Sarah had already poisoned the well. Friends who didn't know me that well started taking her side, saying things like, "Well, you know how she is. Sarah's always been intense, but she wouldn't lie about something like this." Wouldn't lie? That was practically her specialty. It didn't stop with our friends. Sarah started showing up at my work. Yeah, my work. One day, I was sitting at my desk when I saw her through the glass doors of the office building, pacing back and forth like a crazed person. Before I could even react, she walked in and headed straight for me. My co-workers' heads were turning left and right, watching the scene unfold. "What the hell are you doing here?" I whispered harshly, trying to keep my cool as she stormed over. "I need to talk to you," she said, loud enough for half the office to hear. "You can't just ignore me and pretend like we're not going through something serious." I stood up, my face burning with embarrassment. "We've talked. We're done, Sarah. This isn't the place." She crossed her arms and gave me this smug look, as if she had all the power. "You think you can just file for divorce and walk away? You don't get to make that decision by yourself." I clenched my fists, trying to keep myself from causing a bigger scene. "We're not doing this here. Leave, or I'll call security." That seemed to hit a nerve. She rolled her eyes dramatically but stormed out, muttering something about how I'd regret this. Once she was gone, I could feel every eye in the office on me. It was humiliating, but the worst was yet to come. After Sarah's public meltdown at my workplace, I thought she'd finally get the message and leave me alone. But I clearly underestimated just how far she was willing to go. Her next move was far worse than showing up at my office. She decided to drag our entire divorce into the public eye. A few days later, I got a call from a lawyer Sarah had hired. Turns out, she wasn't going to sit back and let me file for divorce on my terms. She was going to fight. And not just for the house or the car, but for everything. The lawyer's voice was calm but cold. "Mr. Evans, Sarah is filing for spousal support, claiming emotional distress and loss of lifestyle due to your neglect and infidelity." I nearly dropped the phone. Infidelity? My infidelity? Are you kidding me? "She has provided several witnesses who are prepared to testify that you were emotionally distant and carried on multiple affairs during your marriage," the lawyer continued. I was fuming. This is all bullshit. I have proof she's the one who cheated on me. The lawyer paused. "You'll have your chance to provide evidence in court, Mr. Evans. Until then, I'd suggest preparing yourself for a lengthy process." Lengthy? I wasn't ready for any of this. I had barely started wrapping my head around the divorce itself, and now I was facing a legal battle that threatened to drag on for months, if not years. I immediately contacted my own lawyer, who assured me that Sarah's claims wouldn't hold up in court, especially since I had hard evidence of her affair. But that didn't stop Sarah from turning our personal nightmare into a public spectacle. She wasn't just content with the legal battle. She wanted to ruin me socially, too. The rumors she'd started among our friends spread like wildfire. People who barely knew us started weighing in, gossiping about how I had supposedly driven her into Jake's arms, because I was emotionally unavailable. Suddenly, I was the villain in everyone's eyes. It didn't matter that I had actual proof of her cheating. Sarah had already spun the narrative, and people were eating it up. Then she took it even further. One day, I woke up to find my phone buzzing with notifications. I opened my social media and saw that Sarah had posted a long, emotional rant about our marriage. She played the victim perfectly, claiming I had neglected her for years, that I was distant and cold, and that she had made a mistake in turning to Jake but only because she felt so alone. The comments were filled with sympathy for her. People I hadn't spoken to in years were chiming in, saying things like, "Stay strong, Sarah," and "You deserve so much better than him." It was nauseating. She had manipulated the entire situation, painting herself as the poor wife driven to cheat by her heartless husband. But I wasn't going to let her destroy my life without a fight. I called my lawyer and decided it was time to release the evidence. I wasn't one to air dirty laundry online, but if Sarah wanted to play this game, I was ready to bring out the big guns. I had texts, pictures, and even video footage from the day I caught her with Jake. "You sure about this?" my lawyer asked. "Once you go public, there's no taking it back." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "She wanted this mess in the public eye, so that's where I'm taking it." That evening, I posted a calm, detailed response to Sarah's rant. I laid out the facts, how I'd caught her in the act, the lies she'd told me, the manipulation. I didn't have to embellish anything because the truth was bad enough. I included screenshots of the messages between her and Jake, as well as photos of them together. It was undeniable. The backlash was immediate. People started turning on Sarah. The same ones who had been so quick to offer her sympathy were now questioning her story. Some were outraged that she had lied so blatantly, while others were just shocked at how deep her deception went. Sarah, of course, didn't take it well. That night, I got another furious call from her. "How dare you post that shit about me? You're ruining my life," she screamed, her voice cracking with anger and desperation. "I'm ruining your life?" I replied, barely able to contain my rage. "You've done nothing but lie and manipulate this whole time. You brought this on yourself." She broke down into hysterics, alternating between screaming at me and sobbing about how I was destroying everything. But I wasn't moved. For once, I felt like I had control, like I wasn't the one being played anymore. This was war now, and I wasn't backing down. After I posted the evidence, things got ugly fast. Sarah was absolutely losing it. She doubled down on her lies, telling anyone who would listen that I had edited the screenshots and that the photos were taken out of context. It was a pathetic defense, but there were still a few people who believed her. At this point, it didn't even matter. The damage was done, and most people could see through her bullshit. But Sarah wasn't the type to admit defeat. Instead of backing off, she escalated things even further. She started bombarding me with texts, calls, and emails, full of threats, insults, and even begging at times. One minute, she was telling me I'd ruined her life and how she was going to make me pay, and the next, she was crying and asking me to reconsider the divorce. The emotional whiplash was insane. One night, around 2 a.m., I got a particularly disturbing call from her. She sounded drunk, slurring her words and screaming into the phone. "You think you're so fucking smart, don't you?" she shouted. "You think you can just walk away and leave me with nothing? I'll make sure you lose everything. Your job, your friends, everything." I tried to keep calm, but it was hard. "Sarah, I'm done with this. You need to stop. Stop. You don't get to tell me to stop. You think I can't ruin you? I'll go to your boss. I'll tell them you've been harassing me, stalking me. You'll never work again." That was her new tactic, threatening to take things to my workplace, trying to destroy my career. I had no doubt she'd actually try it. At this point, Sarah had shown she was capable of anything to get revenge. The next morning, I decided to go to HR at my job and get ahead of things. I sat down with my manager and laid everything out. It was embarrassing, but I couldn't risk Sarah following through on her threats. "I just want you to know what's going on," I told him, handing over some of the texts and proof of her harassment. "She's been unstable, and I'm afraid she might try to cause trouble here." My manager was understanding, thank God. He assured me they'd handle it professionally and that they'd take anything Sarah said with a grain of salt, especially given the evidence I'd provided. Still, it was a blow to my pride. I hated that my personal life had spilled into my work, but it was better than being blindsided by one of Sarah's outbursts. As expected, she didn't waste time. A few days later, she showed up at my office again. This time, she wasn't allowed inside, thanks to the heads-up I gave HR. Security had to escort her off the premises, and I heard later from a coworker that she was screaming about how I was a psychopath and had ruined her life. It was only a matter of time before she tried something else. And then she did. One evening, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I came home to find a police car parked outside my house. My heart sank. What the hell was happening now? An officer approached me as I got out of the car. "Are you Mr. Evans?" "Yeah, that's me," I said, trying to stay calm. "We received a report of domestic disturbance at this address. Your wife, Sarah, claimed you've been threatening her." I could barely believe what I was hearing. "What? I haven't even seen her since she moved out." She provided some text messages that suggest otherwise. "We'd like to ask you some questions." I was floored. Text messages? I knew exactly what she was doing. She'd probably faked or manipulated our old conversations to make it look like I was harassing her. Sarah was trying to get the law involved now, twisting the narrative even further. Thankfully, I had all my evidence saved. I spent the next hour explaining the situation to the officer, showing him the real texts where Sarah had been the one harassing me, threatening to ruin my life. He listened carefully, nodding as I laid everything out. By the end of it, he seemed convinced that she was the unstable one. "We'll file this as a false report," the officer said, "but I'd recommend getting a restraining order. She seems unpredictable." That was an understatement. As soon as the police left, I sat down and called my lawyer. I needed to protect myself, legally, emotionally, and physically. Sarah had crossed the line, and it was clear she wasn't going to stop until she dragged me down with her. "File for the restraining order," I told my lawyer. "I'm done playing nice." This had gone from a messy divorce to full-on warfare, and I wasn't going to let her win. With the restraining order in place, things started to calm down on the surface, but the emotional and legal battles continued to rage. Sarah seemed to have temporarily backed off, but I knew it was just a matter of time before she struck again. In the meantime, I had to focus on my own mental and emotional well-being while navigating the divorce process. I started seeing a therapist. I'd never been one for therapy, but I realized I needed help to process everything that had happened. My therapist was incredibly supportive, helping me understand that Sarah's behavior wasn't a reflection of my worth or value. It was just who she was. Manipulative and destructive. The therapy sessions became a vital outlet for me to talk through my feelings and develop strategies for dealing with the stress and fallout. During one session, I broke down. "I'm so angry and hurt, and I don't know how to let it go. I feel like she's taken over every aspect of my life." My therapist nodded, guiding me through some breathing exercises. It's important to acknowledge those feelings but also to focus on what you can control. You can't change Sarah's actions, but you can control how you respond and how you take care of yourself. On the legal front, things were moving slowly but steadily. My lawyer and I were preparing for the upcoming court hearings. Sarah's accusations had added a layer of complexity to the case, but we were confident that the evidence would clear me of any wrongdoing. The court date was set, and I was bracing myself for what was likely to be a long and grueling process. In the meantime, Sarah's antics continued, though in a less direct way. She kept posting cryptic and dramatic updates on social media, portraying herself as a victim of a cruel and heartless husband. She'd post about healing and starting over, always with a tone of passive-aggressive bitterness. Her posts seemed designed to get sympathy and further manipulate the situation. Despite my initial temptation to respond, I ignored her social media presence. Engaging with her online would only escalate things further. One night, after a particularly rough day, I decided to take a break from the drama. I went out for a drink with a few close friends who had stood by me through the chaos. It was good to have some normalcy and distraction. We talked about everything but Sarah. Sports, movies, the latest news. For a few hours, I felt like I could breathe again. But even when I was with friends, Sarah's shadow loomed over me. During one of our outings, I received a call from my lawyer. "Hey, just wanted to update you," she said, sounding concerned. Sarah's lawyer has filed a motion for spousal support, claiming that she's in financial distress due to the divorce. They're asking for a substantial amount. I felt a pang of frustration. Sarah was pushing every button she could find. "How are we going to handle this?" "We'll contest it," my lawyer assured me. "We have evidence of her financial situation and the fact that she's been lying about her need for support. I'll handle the paperwork and make sure the court sees the truth." The financial aspect of the divorce was becoming another battlefield. Sarah's claims of distress seemed to be a last-ditch effort to get something out of the mess she'd created. It felt like she was trying to bleed me dry emotionally, financially, and socially. Despite the mounting stress, I remained resolute. I knew I had to stay focused on the long-term goal, getting through this divorce and moving on with my life. I kept working with my therapist, stayed in touch with my lawyer, and leaned on my friends for support. The road ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges, but I was determined not to let Sarah's actions define my future. As the court date approached, I steeled myself for what was sure to be a contentious and emotionally charged experience. I was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that I had done everything possible to protect myself and set the record straight. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. I'd prepared as much as possible, but the reality of standing in a courtroom, facing Sarah and her lawyer, was overwhelming. The courtroom was cold and intimidating, filled with the echoes of people talking in hushed tones. I couldn't help but think about how far things had spiraled from what should have been a private, civil separation. Sarah arrived with a dramatic flourish, her face painted with a mask of faux dignity. She had her lawyer, a slick, well-dressed guy who looked like he'd stepped straight out of a high-stakes legal drama. Sarah was dressed in a somber black suit, adding to the illusion of her being a tragic figure. I could tell she was trying to make an impression, but I wasn't about to be swayed. As we took our places, I noticed Sarah's eyes scanning the room. When she saw me, she gave a small, smug smile. It was the same look she had when she knew she was manipulating someone. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my lawyer and the evidence we had prepared. The hearing began, and it quickly became clear that Sarah's lawyer was going to pull out every trick in the book. He started with his arguments, painting Sarah as a desperate, wronged spouse who had been forced into infidelity due to my emotional neglect and cruel behavior. It was the same twisted narrative she'd spun online, but now it was being laid out in a formal setting. My lawyer countered every claim with evidence. We presented text messages, emails, and other documents showing Sarah's affair, her manipulative behavior, and her false accusations. It was a long, grueling process. Sarah's lawyer tried to discredit me, questioning my character and motives, but our evidence held strong. Sarah took the stand, and her performance was something to behold. She was a master of drama, her voice trembling as she recounted her version of events. She spoke of feeling betrayed and abandoned, and even threw in a few crocodile tears for good measure. But the more she talked, the more it became clear that her story was full of holes. When it was my turn to testify, I felt the weight of the moment. I was calm and collected, but it was hard not to feel emotionally drained. My lawyer guided me through my testimony, focusing on the facts and my side of the story. I explained how I had discovered Sarah's affair and how her manipulation and deceit had led to the breakdown of our marriage. After hours of testimony, cross-examination, and legal arguments, the judge called a recess. I stepped outside the courtroom, feeling like I'd just been through a battlefield. My lawyer reassured me that we had presented a strong case and that the judge would see through Sarah's attempts to manipulate the situation. As we waited for the verdict, I was anxious but hopeful. I knew that the evidence was on my side, but the waiting was excruciating. A few days later, we received the court's decision. The judge ruled in my favor on most counts. Sarah's claims for spousal support were denied, and the judge issued a ruling on the divorce terms that favored me. It wasn't the end of the legal battle, but it was a significant victory. Sarah's reaction was predictably dramatic. She threw another public tantrum, claiming that the justice system had failed her and that she had been screwed over. She started posting even more on social media, but this time, the backlash was even more intense. People were starting to see her for who she really was. Someone who played the victim to get what she wanted. For me, the court ruling was a step toward closure. It wasn't over yet, but it was a sign that the truth had prevailed and that Sarah's attempts to control and manipulate me were finally being exposed. As I moved forward, I focused on rebuilding my life and finding peace. The divorce was far from over, and Sarah's behavior was unpredictable, but I knew I had to stay strong and keep moving forward. It was time to focus on myself and start a new chapter. With the court ruling in my favor, there was a tentative sense of relief, but the road to recovery was far from smooth. Sarah's refusal to accept the outcome meant that the drama wasn't entirely over, but the worst of it was behind me. I was determined to move forward and rebuild my life, no matter how difficult the process might be. One of the first things I did was take a step back from everything that had happened. I needed a break from the constant stress and chaos. I decided to take a week off work and spend some time away from my daily routine. I booked a cabin in the mountains, a place where I could find some peace and reflect on everything that had transpired. The days at the cabin were a much-needed escape. The solitude and natural beauty helped me clear my head. I spent my time hiking, reading, and writing in a journal. It was during this retreat that I began to truly process my feelings and start the healing process. I reflected on the relationship with Sarah, recognizing the patterns of manipulation and deceit, and finally allowed myself to let go of the anger and hurt. When I returned from the cabin, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was ready to focus on myself and start making positive changes in my life. One of the first things I did was reach out to friends and family who had supported me throughout the ordeal. I wanted to reconnect with them and express my gratitude for their unwavering support. Reconnecting with old friends and family was therapeutic. Their support reminded me of the positive aspects of my life and helped me see that I had a network of people who cared about me. I began spending more time with them, engaging in activities that I enjoyed but had neglected during the tumultuous months. I also decided to make some changes in my personal life. I had always wanted to take up a new hobby, and now seemed like the perfect time. I started taking cooking classes, something I'd always been interested in but had never made the time for. Cooking became a creative outlet and a way to relieve stress. It was a small but significant step toward rediscovering joy in everyday activities. As for my work, I focused on doing my job to the best of my ability. The stress from the legal battle had taken a toll on my performance, but I was determined to refocus and excel. My manager and co-workers were supportive, and slowly but surely, I regained my confidence in my professional life. Sarah's attempts to drag out the divorce process continued, but they became less frequent and less impactful. Her social media posts dwindled, and the drama started to fade into the background. It was clear that she was struggling to maintain her narrative as people around her started seeing through her lies. One day, I received a letter from Sarah's lawyer. It was a formal notification that she was finally ready to settle the remaining aspects of the divorce, including the division of assets and any remaining financial matters. It was a relief to see that she was finally willing to move forward, even if it was on her own terms. I agreed to the settlement terms, which were fair given the circumstances. With the finalization of the divorce just around the corner, I felt a sense of closure. The legal battle was over, and I could finally put the whole ordeal behind me. As I looked back on everything, I realized that the experience, though painful, had taught me a lot about myself. I had faced adversity, learned to stand up for myself, and emerged stronger. I was ready to embrace the future with a sense of optimism and hope. The road to recovery wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I was beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel and felt more prepared to face whatever came next. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was truly moving on and ready to build a new, positive chapter in my life. With the finalization of the divorce on the horizon, I began to focus on embracing new opportunities and building a life that felt authentic and fulfilling. The process had been exhausting, but it was also a catalyst for significant personal growth and change. One of the most positive changes was reconnecting with old passions and exploring new interests. After my time at the cabin, I realized how much I enjoyed being in nature. I started planning regular hikes and even joined a local outdoor club. The physical activity and the sense of adventure were invigorating, and it became a regular part of my routine. In addition to hiking, I took up photography. It was a hobby I'd always admired but never pursued. The challenge of capturing moments and the creative process of photography helped me focus on the present and appreciate the beauty around me. I began taking classes and even started a small photography blog where I shared my work and connected with other enthusiasts. Socially, I made a concerted effort to expand my circle. I attended various community events and meetups, meeting new people and forming genuine connections. I found that being open to new experiences and relationships enriched my life in unexpected ways. Friendships that had been strained during the divorce process were mended, and I made new friends who shared my interests and values. Work was also going well. I threw myself into my projects, using my renewed focus and energy to excel. My colleagues noticed the positive change in my attitude and performance, and I received recognition for my hard work. It felt good to be valued and to contribute meaningfully to my job. In terms of personal growth, therapy continued to be an essential part of my life. My therapist helped me work through lingering feelings and provided guidance on setting healthy boundaries and fostering self-compassion. I learned to trust myself more and to recognize my own worth beyond the shadows of my past relationship. One day, I got an email that took me by surprise. It was an invitation to an art exhibit featuring local artists. The exhibit was showcasing some of the photographs I had taken during my classes and personal shoots. It was an unexpected honor and a validation of the work I had been doing. The night of the exhibit, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Seeing my work displayed was both thrilling and humbling. The exhibit was a success, and I received positive feedback from attendees. It was a moment of triumph, not just for my photography but for my journey of self-discovery and recovery. The experience reaffirmed that I was on the right path and that I was capable of achieving new and meaningful goals. As the months went by, I noticed a profound shift in my outlook. The pain of the past had not disappeared entirely, but it had become a part of my story rather than the defining feature of my life. I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the lessons learned and the strength I had gained. Sarah's presence in my life had become a distant memory. The occasional interaction was limited to legal matters or administrative details, but they no longer had the power to disrupt my sense of peace. I had moved past the anger and hurt, and I was focused on what lay ahead. With each passing day, I continued to build a life that felt true to who I was. I embraced the changes, the new relationships, and the personal growth. My future was open and full of potential, and I was ready to seize it with optimism and confidence. In the end, the experience had reshaped me. It had been a long and challenging journey, but it had also led me to a place of clarity and renewal. I was excited about the future and eager to see where this new chapter of my life would take me. With the divorce officially finalized and the dust settling, I felt a profound sense of liberation. The courtroom battles and Sarah's manipulative tactics were behind me, and I was ready to embrace a future that was entirely my own. I continued to dive into my passions, letting them shape my new reality. Photography and hiking became more than just hobbies. They were integral parts of my life. I found joy in capturing the beauty of the world around me and the freedom in exploring nature. These activities not only provided a creative outlet but also helped me connect with like-minded individuals who shared my enthusiasm. One day, while at a local park taking photos, I met someone who would become an important part of my life. Her name was Lisa, and she was a fellow photography enthusiast. We struck up a conversation about our favorite subjects and techniques, and our shared interests quickly blossomed into a deeper connection. Our friendship grew naturally, and over time, it developed into something more. Lisa was kind, supportive, and had a warmth that was refreshing. Being with her felt like a breath of fresh air, and she brought a new dimension to my life. Our relationship was different from what I'd experienced before. It was grounded in mutual respect, shared values, and a genuine connection that didn't come with the baggage of past hurts. As our relationship developed, I realized how much I had learned from my previous marriage. The lessons of communication, respect, and emotional intelligence were now guiding me in building a healthier and more fulfilling partnership. Lisa and I navigated our relationship with openness and understanding, and it was clear that we were both committed to creating something positive and lasting. Professionally, I continued to excel at work. The renewed focus and energy I brought to my job were reflected in my performance and relationships with colleagues. My career was moving in a positive direction, and I was being given more opportunities to take on new projects and responsibilities. The sense of accomplishment and satisfaction I felt in my professional life was a testament to my resilience and hard work. With my personal and professional life flourishing, I began to think about the future with optimism. I started setting new goals and planning for new adventures. Whether it was traveling to new places, taking on new creative projects, or simply enjoying the everyday moments, I felt a renewed sense of excitement and possibility. Reflecting on the journey, I saw the trials and challenges not as a series of unfortunate events but as crucial experiences that shaped who I had become. The pain and struggle had led to growth and transformation, and I was grateful for the strength and clarity that emerged from the ordeal. Life after the divorce was about embracing new beginnings and finding joy in the present. I had learned to appreciate the small victories and the everyday moments that made life meaningful. The future was full of promise, and I was ready to embrace it with an open heart and a hopeful spirit. As I looked ahead, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The past was a chapter that had closed, and the future was an unwritten story. I was excited to continue writing it, one day at a time, and to see where the journey would take me.